Welcome to the Otherweb. Our guest today is Reilly. Anne has some interesting ideas that lie at the intersection of evolution, sociology, and information systems. I asked her to come on the show so I can play devil's advocate and see if these ideas hold up. Anne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here.
It's great to have you on. So you have some interesting ideas about humanity and morality and all these other big questions. Can you give us a 30,000-foot overview of them?
Well, yeah, actually, my book, The Human Idea, Earth's Newest Ecosystem, is a 30,000-foot view of humanity as a thing. And my theory, and I loved your previous podcast with Victor Kumar because he's like, I don't trust anybody who comes out with their own theory. And I'm like, uh-oh, busted already. But I have come out with a new theory. But the way my theory works is that we have evolved from the natural world. We are relatives of cells and animals, and in particular on our line, the chimpanzees and the bonobos and all those animals you talk about. But humans are very different in that we have this ability to think and choose. And when I look at how humans have evolved, there is this break. We are alike with nature, but we are also very different. And the difference comes down to an animal has, when they're born into the ecosystem. They're born with a full set of DNA and all the instructions that DNA allows them to do. And that's how they survive. Humans have come along, and we are also members of the human ecosystem. We are born in with a full set of DNA, and we have that DNA set of instructions to keep our bodies alive. But because of our ability to think, we have created an additional ecosystem. And that is one based on ideas. What your previous guest, Victor Kumar, talked about as culture, I just widen it to talk about ideas. When humans think of an idea, then they can get other people to agree on that idea. When an idea is shared, it becomes an object in the idea ecosystem, which is what I call the Ideasphere. And that can be shared and have a life of its own. And it can go for years and years and years and years. And it is very dependent on the sharing, not on the quality of the idea. An animal, if it mutates and it creates a change in its body, it will, if it doesn't fit in the environment in which it's living, it will not survive. But humans can create a new idea, and they can manipulate their environment in such a way that as long as it's shared, they can keep a bad idea going for thousands of years if we want. And because they're the only way humans survive, right, is to get resources. So if you can get resources and feed yourself and have a family, do all this stuff with a bad idea, then that idea is going to live on. And you can count a lot of human ideas as bad ideas, right? So that's the way I look at it. The second thing about this is that animals use two fundamental ways to operate. They can compete to get resources, or they can collaborate to work together to get resources. And in nature, we have traditionally seen the competition, but we haven't seen the collaboration. I want to use, our bodies as an example. Our bodies are made of 35 trillion cells. Those cells all collaborate to keep you alive and to keep the cells alive. Okay. So, and there's a special form of collaboration called coordination, which is the mechanism by which all your cells work together. And that mechanism is your brain and your neural system, right? The brain basically doesn't do anything. It doesn't pump blood or process anything other than the mechanisms to keep all those cells working together. That's what your brain does. Well, humans have those same behaviors. We compete. We also collaborate, and we coordinate. And the coordination mechanism in a family is the parents. In an institution, it's management. And in a society, it's government. And so, but because we can think and choose, use those mechanisms very differently than humans. And so we have done some good and some bad. And now we're sort of on a cusp of self-destruction with climate change that, we could be the first species that actually destroys ourselves. Other animals can't destroy themselves. They just don't have the capability to do it. But we, with the ability to manipulate our environment and our surroundings and have ideas, we can do a lot of bad things for a long time, and then we can kill ourselves. So that is sort of the fundamental a case I make, is that if we use nature's tools the way nature works in your body to keep your body alive, and we applied those rules to society, we would actually have a chance at survival.
Okay. So this is a really interesting theory, and this is the first time I'm hearing about the Ideasphere. So before we dive into practical implications, I want to try to figure out how it's different from other similar theories I've seen in the past.
Sure.
So the first one, let's dive to the oldest version of a similar idea, which is Richard Dawkins' chapter about memes in The Selfish Gene, right? How is the Ideasphere different from his idea of memes essentially propagating themselves at the expense of humans, or with humans as the host?
Well, memes would just be another word for ideas, right?
Right.
And here's the thing. Humans are born with no ideas. We're born with our full set of DNA, but we are born with no ideas. So the first thing that happens is ideas get put into our heads. All right. We get taught by our parents, how to speak and don't touch the hot stove and all of these things that parents think are good for their children. And those are ideas that children learn from the very beginning. That's the only way we can survive in the Ideasphere and in our societies, is to learn the language of the ability to communicate, which is with ideas, right? And then, when we're older, then, it's kind of like, oh, my mom and dad and the teachers and everything gave me these ideas, but man, they don't work for me. I got to sort them out and figure out my own ideas. Animals don't do that at all. They have their DNA, which says, we have programmed you to survive. They hear your instructions. They just go live. But we have to sort out our goals, our ideas first, and our values, and then what values we want to live by, what actions we want to take. And then we can decide whether we're on the right track. So when Dawkins talks about memes, what he's talking about is the ideas that people accept. And it's very similar, but what I'm saying is what I do is make the case for why we can use the tools that animals use to build their coordination systems, and why we can use those as a guide to make better societies. But we have to adjust those rules that animals make for the fact that humans think and choose. If you don't understand that humans think and choose, you will keep making bad ideas. Like we have religion, which is, I'm not being pejorative on religion, but religion says, God said this, you must do this. It's like, no, the human nature is to think and choose. And if you look at how animals work and the cells in your body work, what they do is they say, hey, cells, you get to do whatever you want, but you can't hurt the other cells and you can't hurt the body. So if that was our prime directive for humans, what we would say is, people, you get to do whatever you want, but you can't hurt each other. Because as soon as you start hurting each other, your society is going to crumble. And that's the prime directive that I think we should adopt for making better societies. And the decisions we make will depend on where is there harm and where can we allow choice. So
that raises a lot more questions in my mind, but I want to save them for later, because I think there's quite a few leaps that are being made between how cells in the body behave, and basically the golden rule or the non-aggression principle that you just arrived at.
Right.
But let's take a step back. So we're basically talking about memes, except we're taking a human-centric lens instead of Richard Dawkins' gene-centric or meme-centric lens, which basically then sounds a lot like, I don't remember what word Yuval Noah Harari used to describe the same thing, but he was talking about, I think, fictions, right?
Right.
That basically unite us. And if we all believe in the same idea, then we can cooperate around that idea. Like if we all believe in the value of the dollar, then we can use the dollar for commerce.
Or if we can convince anybody or force them to believe the value of the dollar, it's just as effective, right? That's the problem. Is human choice. Human choice is much broader than a gene, right? Genes follow instructions. Humans have the ability to choose which instructions they want to follow.
So I understand the difference between the idea and the gene, but the point I'm trying to arrive at is it seems like ideas are basically a prerequisite for human cooperation. And most of the good stuff that we've done over the past 300,000 years, let's say, were the result of being able to communicate ideas to each other and agree on them. Otherwise, if I'm building a round wheel and somebody is building a square wheel and I can't communicate to them that, round is more efficient for this, and by the way, try to use the same size as me, otherwise this thing will be lopsided, right? Then we wouldn't be able to actually make things that go faster than humans or carry larger loads across distance.
Right. Well, that's because ideas, by sharing them and by putting them into physical form, when you made the wheel, you can now, that thing exists by itself. We have literally taken in, before humans, the only information that existed was in the body. The only information that existed was in the bodies, in the DNA of animals. That's where information is stored. But when we created that wheel, we put information outside our bodies for the first time ever. And that thing outside our bodies has an evolution of its own. So wheels turned into carts and turned into buggies and turned into cars and turned into, I don't know, rocket ships that somehow use wheels somewhere, because it has an evolution of its own outside.
Can I challenge you on that?
Absolutely.
Because it doesn't seem like it has an evolution of its own outside the fact that it's an idea in our head. Only writing basically put the idea out of our head.
Nope, the wheel is an idea. The wheel is an idea. It's physically there. But
that's not how it propagates across.
Of course, anybody who...
Typically, it propagates by talking, not by showing somebody a wheel that exists somewhere else.
Both exist. Talking and sharing, of course, are ways that we share an idea. But the physical things we create, those are even more important because they exist. Let's say your person who invented the wheel dies tomorrow. The idea of the wheel is still there. The wheel is there. So it can go on its own regardless of the person who created it. In fact, I use the book, Charles Darwin's Origin of Species. I use that book to write my book. Charles Darwin died in 1882. His book was published in 1859 and still exists today and is available for me to take the ideas that were there and translate them into new ideas, into a new book.
So that is a good example, but let's use some counterexamples. If you look historically at knowledge of astronomy, before there was writing, it seems like it was propagating between the ages, even though there was no physical embodiment of that knowledge that was being passed around. So the oral tradition by itself is sufficient to transfer ideas across time and across space, even if there is no physical embodiment.
Right, exactly. And so here's the thing. You talked about 300,000 years between 300,000 years when people were discussing these things and maybe 10,000 years ago when the first writing existed. The pace of change was quite slow because you had to teach everybody and they had to remember things and stuff got lost and all the things. But once we began writing, we began speaking and writing and recording things, those things had a life of its own outside just oral tradition. And the pace of change accelerates. And all I'm saying is, you're right. I mean, we started just communicating, and that's wonderful. That's how cells do it. They communicate, and that's the only way they can collaborate. But at some point, we've passed into a massively accelerating pace of change by putting those things outside our body.
Right. I think if we use Darwin's language, then we can say that if memes are self-replicating, with writing, they just replicate more accurately.
Right, exactly. And with computers, I mean, and AI, now you're even to a different level of replication. They are accumulating information and putting it together. I mean, I use AI to say, summarize my chapter. And they're like, oh, I was like, that's a great summary. I would never have done that on myself, So yeah, we're continuing to break to accelerate the rate of communication and change in humans. Animals are still back, they're still communicating the way they did because they cannot communicate across species. So they can communicate within their species and they can do some mutually beneficial behaviors, but they can't communicate across species. So they are not able to have the animal United Nations get together and decide to solve the world's problems. Sometimes I wish they would because they'd probably kick us out, but that's another story.
Okay, so now that we've covered basically what the mechanism is, I want to dive into either practical or moral implications.
Right.
And again, starting from Harari's thesis that basically all the good stuff that humans have done, how we have improved our own lifespan, our own health span, how we have reduced our infant mortality and things like that were the result of being able to follow ideas as opposed to just follow our genetic material.
Absolutely.
The fact that we don't murder somebody when we're upset with what they have done is itself the result of an idea of acculturation, because otherwise I think we would, at least us men, we would murder a lot more people, right? Unless there was something taught to us when we were children that, murder is kind of bad.
Right. Well, and you're right. And then if you look at the history of humankind, murder, we are in the least murderous era in these last couple hundred years because of the ideas we've developed that say, hey, maybe murder isn't a good thing. But what I will say on murder is that cells are way ahead of us in your body. They are way ahead of us. They have a way to keep all the cells in line. And
cells in the body, yes. Animals in nature, not quite.
No, because they can't communicate. Again, right. Cells in a body communicate, so they can arrange to say, okay, in fact, like if you cut your finger, there's a disclosure, kind of what I call it, disclosure. A signal goes up to the brain says, oh, right index finger, emergency, we got to go save keep the blood from going all over. And they do everything. And, what happens is, you scab up and then pretty soon you get a scar and then pretty soon it's all better, right? Your body does that. It has evolved for billions of years to repair a cell. And sometimes the body gets tricked. Like with a cancer cell, the cancer cell says, I'm fine. I'm a good guy. And the brain says, fine, you're good. And boom, it spreads everywhere and you're dead. So the body isn't perfect. It's evolved to be as good as it can be, but it's not perfect. That's why, it fights off viruses. It has in a little army that it works and says, oh, you've got all this. But we don't have that. We can choose when to murder and when not to. You said, yeah, people, they don't get mad and murder people. Some people do. They get mad and murder somebody. So we have that choice. And what I'm saying is, if we learn from a very young age and educate people to understand that we have our choice, it's our human superpower to choose and think. And if we teach them what the rule, this prime directive is, which is, hey, you get to figure out what you want to do in life. You just can't hurt anybody while you do it. I would think that that's something every person could agree on because it's in their self-interest. I'm not going to get hurt. And it's in the interest of society. Nobody's going to get hurt here. It won't be perfect, but it will be a better approach.
Right. So I agree with the non-aggression principle. And in general, as you can see, there's a bunch of Stoic quotes behind me. So I agree with the idea of living in accordance with nature. Right. I have no disagreement there. Good. Where I'm trying to, actually, let's use your body analogy here because it's a good one. It seems like we have managed to communicate with each other in ways that created many good things. Mm-hmm. And you're citing some examples where our communication has broken down and resulted in some bad things, like our inability to not destroy our environment. Cells in the body do that too, right? Autoimmune disorders, things like that. It happens, right? So they have some cases of miscommunication as well. In fact, animals do that too. Some animals have overhunted and basically brought themselves to extinction that way as well, right? So it seems like all of these mechanisms are good with some corner cases in which they go awry. So how are we different? It seems like our corner cases are just as rare.
Well, what I would say is that so the essence of nature and the essence of life is, and the essence of the universe is change. Everything is always changing. So every cell that, the cells that started off have evolved to become multicellular creatures, and one of those is human. Change is the nature of the universe. So at any time, mutations are occurring, different versions are occurring. I mean, if you look at how life works with the way the RNA and the DNA, they mix up those genomes so that every offspring has a different set of chromosomes in a different slot. So they are all going to be different. And some of them will be really, really great, right? And some of them will be really, really bad, and that is the same with humans. I mean, some people have, are built with really good brains and they have a wealthy or at least an adequate physical environment in which to live, and they become professors or they become inventors, or they become, I don't know, super mathematicians, whatever. And then some people maybe have a great brain, but they're in just a horrible physical, abusive, poverty situation. And they don't have the ability to use that brain to do something really fantastic, So that's what nature does. In order for nature just moves, it changes. And what happens. So when we're talking about humans who have this ability to choose, we're trying to figure out how to choose to help us survive. We have this ability to choose. It's our strength that no other animal has to the level we have it. It's our ability to make the choices to create a better society. We do not have to. We can create nuclear weapons. We can use them and we can blow ourselves all up, right? We can choose to try to, figure out climate change or not. And I make a case in my book that, one of the real problems in American society is the profit maximization goal of companies. Because when you start maximizing profit at all costs, you will start harming people. You will start cutting corners. You will start doing things that are bad. And then you will accumulate that wealth and prevent others from having the opportunities. So to me, we're making you said we're making many good choices. We're also making many bad choices everywhere, and we're calling them good. And I would say we need to rethink this the way nature would think about it, and maybe apply those rules a little bit differently.
Okay, so again, I agree with many things that you say. In fact, I founded the Otherweb as a public benefit corporation because I didn't like the idea of just maximizing shareholder value.
Right.
I wanted something else to bind us besides just the idea of $2 is better than $1.50, right?
And you are exactly right. But the only way you've done it as a choice, but most people, I'm a business person. I'm an accountant. I have an MBA. I have a background in economics. And what we were taught was you maximize profit any way you can, and you will do this and this and this and this. And if you do that, you will make choices that ultimately harm people or prevent people from having the opportunities. When you made your choice, you said, I want to choose another goal besides profit maximization as the way to go. It's not that profit's not important. Profit is okay. It is the profit at all costs that is the problem. So what you've done voluntarily is said, I have profit as a mindset, but I also have these other goals as a mindset, and those are personal to you. But a lot of people who are born where they have a board of directors and the share price is the king of all, they don't make that choice, and bad things will happen. They will bribe the government to get laws passed for they call it lobby. Sorry, not bribe. They call it lobby. We lobby the government, but it's legalized bribery to make laws that benefit them. They will create products that harm people and then pay them off when they get harmed so that they don't have a lawsuit against them. This is what the animals will not do that. They won't do that. They can't. They're like,
they would if they could, I think. They just can't.
Well, but they can't. Exactly. And we are the animals that can, and that's what we've been doing. So my thing is to say, at least since we have the brain and we can think, we should at least recognize what we're doing and understand why animals can't do this and why we can. And maybe we should make a different choice.
All right. So let's talk about choices then. This brings us into morality. So you mentioned a few principles so far, right? The first principle is basically non-aggression. Do whatever you want, but don't harm others. I can see a good justification in that, though, of course, you have trolley problems and things like that, but let's let this one stand. The libertarian in me really likes that. But then the second one that you're using a lot in your examples seems to be the idea of minimizing externalities. Because when I pursue the profit motive, it's not that I am necessarily harming others. I am just putting a price of 0 on the externalities of my actions.
Yes, right.
Right. And that price of 0 might be okay for a while, like emitting some CO2 probably is okay. I do it when I breathe, right? But emitting a lot of CO2 is probably not okay once you factor in the fact that everybody else does that at the same time as me.
Right.
So it's not a black and white that necessarily a particular externality is bad. It's just if you don't price them in, then you have a collective action problem.
Right. And this is where the role of coordination comes in. When you when you made a new goal besides profit, you're the coordinator of your company. You chose a different goal. And you said,
Right.
nope, we're going to do it differently. Well, in a society, that's the role of government. The role of government is to coordinate. And in my case, in my ideal society, the role of government is to make sure that nobody is harmed and everybody maximizes their choices. So what you said was basically they are the force to, I wouldn't use the term price in externalities. What I would say is they're the ones that are going to require other goals, the societal good goals on that company. So, and I use in my book the example of water pollution. So what the body would do is every cell has to take a little bit of its energy and send up a message to the brain and the neural system and say, here's my status. And the brain says, oh, you're fine. We aren't going to do anything with you. You just keep going. But every once in a while, like the cut finger comes up and they say, oh, we got to do something, right? And to make sure that cell gets to stay alive. That's what we do. Well, the same concept should occur, or what I think we should implement is that there's a disclosure requirement when there's a goal that isn't potentially harmful. So I'm using water pollution. I say we're in a position now today where water pollution can be a real issue. And we have real problems. People drink this water, they get sick and they die. And there's all kinds of, the fish die, and we have all kinds of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask every company to report up what they pollute, what their pollution is. And they might have to hire a company to do it, but that's just like the cell sending up information. They use some of their resources to send this information. So everybody sends up the information and they say, okay, here's what I do. And that now this is where it gets a little bit different than how we normally do things. What we normally do is like there's an EPA and they say, we're going to go out and check all you guys. And when you don't do it, we're going to fine you until you fix it. That's not how bodies work. If we did that, we'd all be dead because our cells would just not cooperate. But what we do instead, we say, hey, okay, we got your information. Here's what we're going to do to help you. We're going to try this. We're going to do this. We will, figure out who has to pay for this, but we're going to make sure that you don't cooperate or I don't pollute. And then as a result, we get a company that now knows how not to pollute, and we get clean water. And when they report up again, the thing says, oh, you're all within the same boundaries, right? That's how a body works. And what I'm saying is
can I interject? At the risk of sounding disagreeable, I kind of disagree with every part of this.
Oh, okay.
So first of all,
you're a
EPA is
libertarian. You're a libertarian. I would expect you to disagree.
Yeah, but I think that in general, the way the EPA works is exactly the opposite of what you just said. It does require a whole bunch of disclosures, a whole bunch of environmental studies before I can build anything. And the cost of these disclosures is itself an externality, right? If in order to build something, I have to do a whole bunch of environmental studies to make sure that I don't pollute every single thing under the earth, then the time to build and the cost to build increases to the point of us creating housing shortages and a whole bunch of other problems. And California is a prime example of that, right? So I think that specifically because the EPA doesn't work the way that you just said, that it does require a whole bunch of upfront studies, it creates a bigger externality than pollution.
Well, that's on new businesses because they're trying to prevent things like pollution. And that's exactly how it should work. But they also, for existing businesses where they're out there grandfathered in and they're polluting, I'm talking about those existing businesses, not
but they
about
do it for
business.
new projects, right? Existing business perhaps, but if they start the building of a new factory, let's say, and that factory might be emitting something into the water, the amount of environmental studies they do right now ahead of time is significant.
Right. Well, and I lived in, this is a really interesting example. I lived in Oregon. I lived near Intel, had a big manufacturing company, and they built this new thing, and they were polluting. They were sending fluorine up in the air, but they bought off. They literally bribed the DEQ, the Environmental Department of Environmental Quality for the state, so that they could pollute. And it finally came out, and everybody was like, "Oh, you can't do this." So you're right in that. Those are, again, because the driver is all the money, the resources, and the driver is for profit. Those people are going to win those battles. And those externalities, what I'm saying is if if the society's goal is not to pollute, then those aren't externalities. That's the cost of doing business. That's the cost. When a company is required to not pollute and harm people, that's what it should be. That's not like, hey, you should be allowed to harm people and pollute. No, you should not. And what you've Jen said is you linked it to, well, that creates a housing shortage or whatever. That is not necessarily the link. These people, if they're going to be members of our society, they should not be legally allowed to harm the people in the society. So right. I disagree with you.
I agree with that. Where I disagree is that upfront disclosures are the approach that is going to work. It clearly doesn't work. It clearly occurs today, and it clearly still leads to pollution because of corruption, right?
Well, yes, but what I would say is then our systems need to get better. Don't throw out the idea of disclosures through, improve your system. This is where I have a problem when people say, well, you can tell how well somebody's going to do in life by their zip code. And I'm like, well, that's just a symbol of a bad society, that we don't have systems in place to allow everybody to succeed. So in my case, I'd say, no, we just don't have the disclosures right. We don't have that system right. Not that it shouldn't be done.
No. I agree with that, but that leads me to the bigger problem that we're observing here, which is we're essentially talking about government here as a way to preclude a prisoner's dilemma, right? Or let's not use the prisoner's dilemma, let's use, high beams, like when I'm driving, right? I do better when I drive with my high beams on, whether you have your low beams or your high beams. You have the same, right? So if there was no government telling us that you can't actually blind people with high beams, everybody would be driving this way. There needs to be a coordinating mechanism for all of us to agree that if there's another car on the road, we put our low beams on, even though it doesn't benefit us. Because at the end, there will be less externality, less dead people on the road. We agree on all that. It seems like with high beams, our coordination works relatively well. But with a lot of other problems, our coordination mechanism, which is our government, seems to be problematic because who's watching the watchers, right? The moment we elect somebody into government, now these guys can sell their power with the same profit motive that companies have. So is that a solvable problem?
Yes, I go into a lot of this. Again, you go back to nature. So the way nature works, first of all, to your very first problem, which is the legalized bribery or the lobbying, is in your body, your brain is protected from all the other cells. There's a very specific mechanism. Things go into the neural system. They're communicated up. We allow infection of our government systems, our coordinating systems, because we allow people to just go directly to the government and say, hey, we'll pay you, we'll give you the resources. That's like the heart saying, hey, brain, give me some super extra great, cells, and I will give you some extra good blood and everything will be great. And then the kidneys die because they didn't get anything. That's just, the body doesn't even begin to work that way, but we do. We don't protect. There should be no private money going into government at all. No private money or no institutional money in government, in elections, nothing. The only thing should be that the people who vote should get the ability to contribute to an election based on some limited amount, like $10,000 per election. And that's it. They're the voters. They get the say. Institutions, they get to do their own goals, but they are not voters. They do not get a say in how a country is run. Now, they can communicate their concerns or their issues, but they can't influence it with money. That's one thing that's very...
Can I pause you there? Because that's an interesting one. I completely agree with this one, with the caveat that what you described exists in other countries, but they still have a coordination problem. And
right.
My theory as to why is that corruption is not when money buys government. Corruption is when government power is sold for anything, right? Regardless if it's money or not. So if I choose a particular group of people and I give them a goodie at the expense of everybody else and they vote for me next time, that seems to me like corruption as well. And other countries have that form of corruption. They just don't have the form of corruption that involves lobbying or donations from corporations anonymously in unlimited amounts.
Yeah, it's a very big problem. And so when I discuss this in my book, I come up with the best solution I can see given our system that we have today. And that is that we create in the United States a new branch of government called the evaluation branch. So, when you look at the brain, all it does is enforce its rules. That's all it does. And it enforces it in a long string of successful behavior that says, this is how I can keep the cells in the body the best alive. Not the perfect. It's just what they've evolved to at this point. Well, what I'm thinking is that when we have our current system, we create our Constitution is like our goals, right? Provide for the general welfare, ensure domestic tranquility. Those are our goals. The Constitution sets our goals. And then the laws we enact are the implementations of those goals, right? They're the instructions we use to live by, right? It says you can't murder people. It's like, okay, everybody says can't murder people. Okay, good. Can't rob people. Okay, everybody says can't rob. Okay, that's the law. But sometimes there's a lot of problems with that. Sometimes we create laws that says a minority is 3/5 of a person. That's not for the greater good.
That was in the Constitution.
It was in the Constitution. Yeah, it's like, yes, it's bad. And so,
but only for the purpose of apportioning electors.
Yeah, exactly.
So not for all purposes.
Yeah, but see this. You get my drift. Is that we can create laws that aren't actually for the good of the people. They aren't exactly complying with the prime directive of everybody gets to do what they want, but you can't harm anybody. We have laws doing all kinds of things. For instance, gay marriage, which is now accepted, for years was like, you can't, that's immoral. It's like, wait, a gay person marrying another person hurts no one. That is non-harmful behavior. It doesn't hurt anybody. You may not like it. You may look over there and go, I don't approve of that, but that's not harm.
Yeah, but the same is true for me using magic mushrooms in my basement, right? So that doesn't harm anybody either, as long as I stay in my basement.
Exactly. But if you take so many that you go out and harm somebody, this is where I do mention that drugs is a really sticky wicket to try and figure out where the line is. Gay marriage is easy. It doesn't harm anybody. Guns, on the other hand, have the potential to harm and kill somebody. So the rule should be, when you're a government and you're coordinating, is, does the behavior cause harm? If yes, you regulate. Does the behavior not harm? Let it go. Now, that line, it's very simple to say it, and it's very hard to figure it out.
It's very blurry.
And that's why...
For almost every behavior, I can come up with a theory as to why it's a precursor to some bad behavior.
And a precursor can't do it. It's got to be, like I said, if you...
But ownership of a gun is a precursor. It's not an aggression on somebody else, right?
The harmful behavior is the shooting. So what you have to do, and this is where the government has a much harder job, and they're lazy right now because they don't consider it this way, is how can people have a gun, but how do we prevent the shootings? That's the problem. Do you do insurance? Do you say, every gun owner, you have to have insurance and we need to go in and we're going to say, we're going to charge you a premium, but if you lock your gun up, if you don't have a teenage boy, if you, all these other things, your premium gets lower. And if you don't do any of those things, we just aren't going to give you insurance, or the premium is going to be so high. That's a market solution to the problem. There's also banning guns, also not effective because it will just create a black market. So that doesn't work. But regulations that say, we want to do background checks might be a good idea to prevent the worst of this. So that's where lawmaking is very difficult, because you have to define where harm is, and then you have to work to make laws that prevent the harm and allow the choice. It's not easy.
Yeah, I agree with this. I just want to go back to the precursor idea, right? Which is, again, ownership of a gun does not harm anybody, but usage of a gun potentially does. And so we are sometimes placing limits on things that don't actually cause harm to anybody just because they are precursors to something. You have the same idea that you expressed with regards to drugs, but I can even use let's say, less controversial examples with DUIs, right? Driving drunk doesn't actually harm anybody, but we just see that statistically, it leads to a lot more harm. And therefore, we banned the thing that is not aggression just because we are afraid that it statistically leads to aggression. So it seems like we do that a lot. We go beyond harm and we go into the possibility of harm.
Yeah, I make the point that our laws sometimes are so broad that we gather up a lot of non-harmful behavior along with the harmful behavior, and that's not good either. That's why I think legislating is much more difficult than people say, but we're doing it from the wrong idea. So if we had this idea, maximize choice and minimize harm, and then have to work out where harm is, that's a hard thing to do, and our laws would be more specific or more applicable or make more sense just generally.
They would have more overlap with morality than they do now.
Right. Because the morality isn't about love or anything. It's do no harm. That's the basic morality: is do what you want, don't do harm. And if that's the morality we live by, I think everybody can get behind it, regardless of their religion or their all those other things. We can agree on this without needing external forces like deities, or even the rule is we live together by our choice, and these are the choices we make.
So this probably leads us to the most difficult questions that we will probably end with, which is, how do we all agree on what the rules are? Because it looks like if you explore the moral discussion, or at least the moral implications of what people are saying in the political sphere, it seems like there are very few moral principles we actually agree on. I'm not even sure we agree on the non-aggression principles, but we certainly don't agree on what people define as aggression against somebody else, right? One side of the political discussion might think that saying the wrong thing is extremely aggressive. The other side will actually sometimes, view offending religious sentiments as very aggressive, right? And both of these aren't physical aggression from a libertarian perspective. From my perspective, it's like, I should be able to say this about you and about your God.
Right. Well, and again, with, there's a big difference when the founders of the Constitution created freedom of speech. Freedom of speech was really limited, right? We could get on the soapbox and talk, or maybe there were a few people, like a newspaper, that we could sort of control the pinpoints. Social media, that's blown it all open. Now everybody can say whatever they want, but not only can they say it, but those social media posts are physical in nature. They can be transferred just like a writing in a book or a wheel on a car. They are physical in nature. So speech has turned into a thing that can have a life of an evolution of its own. And I think that's what people are not recognizing about the speech today that is so different about the impact of social media today. It is a physical thing. It is not just you talking. The fact that you're recording me has allowed this conversation to live on its own with, and it can be transferred beyond you or I to places, and people can make of it what they want, but it is out there on its own, and it will, if you and I are successful, it will create an evolution of ideas, right, that go forward. That's what we're here to. We're here to change the world by ideas, right? When we talk about social media today or anything like this, it's not, it's a physical thing. You have to treat it as a physical thing that can harm, or it may not harm. If I say, the election was rigged and it's a lie, that's one thing. If I say my dog is cute, that's another thing, right? And it's completely harmless. And one could cause harm. If somebody says we need to go, attack the Capitol because the election was rigged, that can cause harm.
But it's always dangerous to pick an extreme example. If you picked an example where the split is actually about 50-50 about what is true and what is not true, then it would be very dangerous to say about the 50% that disagree with you, their speech is harmful.
Right. So what I actually deal with social media in my book, and it's in the last appendix. And what I do is say that you got to let people say what they want. But what we also have to do is require people to describe their posts as either true or not true, as an opinion or truth. And truth has to be defined as something that can be verified And an opinion is everything else. If I say my dog is cute, I have to post it with, it's my opinion, right? Because it's my opinion. If I say the election was rigged, the facts are that there is no proof that an election was rigged. Every single chance to prove that the election was rigged was by the systems we have was declined, was said, nope, it wasn't. So somebody has to say, if the election was rigged, they have to say, this is only my opinion. It is not true. That's what I am saying people need to do in an environment where disinformation exists. You need to take responsibility for protecting me and telling me what's true and what's not true.
I'm going to again disagree with you on this.
Of course you will.
I think that without controversial opinions, without opinions that are crazy at the time that they are said, there is no progress whatsoever. Every single idea that is true today started as controversial. So I shouldn't have to preface with, this is my opinion, I think the speed of light is constant, if I'm Einstein, right? I'm saying something crazy. I'm saying something that contradicts everything that every scientist before me said, and I'm claiming it is true. And without this, progress will not happen. Of course, the rest of society should look at me at that point and say, you know what? Interesting idea. Until you provide more evidence or until more people corroborate this idea, I'm going to ignore it and live by the old rules because they predict stuff better for them, right?
Oh, you get such a good example because you just said a truth starts as opinion. Fine, identify it as
that's not what I said. I'm sorry. It starts as something that everybody else perceives as false, but that is claimed to be true. It's clearly not opinion.
Okay, so the difference is when Einstein created his relativity, he said, here is my statement. And here is the truth. Here's the evidence. He put it out there in his paper and said it's true. So he said, no, I'm saying it's true and I have the evidence to show it. And then it's up to people to say, oh, let me look at the evidence and see if that's true or not. Right. So yeah, you could say the election was rigged. Okay, that's not a good example, but you could say, I don't know. It's an example right now. Let me use it. The election was rigged, but say because I found some 10 votes or I think what Donald Trump said was there were 6,000 dead people voted in Atlanta. And then everybody said, nope, they came out. All the officials said, no, 6,000 people did not vote in that election. So it is fair to say if you're going to be in a situation where the harmful and non-harmful stuff are coming out at once, it is required for us to say whether it's true or not. And there's a mechanism to appeal and all those other things, of course. But what I'm saying is that we need to look at these problems differently. And the regulation isn't with the owner of Facebook or Twitter. It's with the person who has to post. You regulate there. That's all we're saying is that protects me.
Yeah, I should mention what we're doing on Otherweb is ignoring the true-false continuum, right? And basically saying, wait, you're making a claim? Good. Here's the evidence you're supposed to provide. Here's how you're supposed to phrase it, etc. Right? So we are form-checking the claimant regardless of whether we consider this to be a mainstream truth or something contrarian or something that's completely batshit crazy, pardon my French, right? Either way, you are required to state it in a certain way for it to be taken seriously.
Right. And you have evolved into this place because of what has occurred before. The evolution of disinformation has given you the opportunity to create a new idea and to create a new niche for you to make the world a better place in your view. That is exactly what humans do. And that's wonderful.
Right. But now let's take the even more complicated step, right? You see how much disagreement there is about truth versus non-truth. And this is in the limited realm of truth claims, right? But once you go into the realm of moral claims, what is good and what is bad, I think there is even less agreement. So if people can't even agree on something basic, like whether or not there were 6,000 dead people voting in Atlanta, how can they agree on whether, I don't know, misgendering something is immoral and aggressive, for instance? It seems like we stand no chance, right?
Well, my view is that morality is an idea. Everybody is going to have a different idea. A morality is an idea that everybody comes to on their own. If there's as many versions of morality as there are people, and that is okay. What I'm saying is you can have whatever morality you want. You just can't hurt anybody. See, I don't care.
But that is a moral claim.
Well, Well, it's not a moral claim. It's an actual factual claim. You say you can't harm a person. Now we have to define what harm is, but you can't harm. If you go out and beat somebody up because they're gay, then that's harm. A person has a right to live their life if they're not harming you. There is no harm. So you don't get to harm them. You don't have to like it. I'm not requiring you to like gay people if you don't like them. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you not to harm them.
Do you disagree that sorry, I want to kind of interject here, because do you disagree with the statement that you can't harm other people is a moral claim and not a fact? Can't doesn't seem like a statement of fact, does it?
Right. I guess what I would look at is that, it's a good question. I suppose looking at your definition, but I would say in nature, this happens because it is the most effective way to survive. So when I'm making the claim that you get to do what you want as a human and you can't harm anybody, I'm stating it not as a moral claim, but as a factual, this is the most effective way to survive. So I guess I'm looking at it differently than you are. I don't see that as a morality. I see it as a necessity for coexistence.
So that is an interesting way to spin it. We're essentially saying that the claim is, and I'm trying to rephrase now your moral claim into a factual claim. Your factual claim is that the non-aggression principle is the most effective cooperation method. That seems like a claim that requires a lot of evidence.
Well, yes. I would say the non-aggression is the most effective way of survival, not cooperation, of survival.
That's an even harder thing to prove,
yes.
isn't it?
And all I can say is I have 4 billion years worth of evidence from nature. And I have, 10,000 years of humans not doing that, because we've created different sets of morals. We've got, there's a Christian morality, there's, Jewish morality.
Well, I think it's not 10,000 years though. It's the entire history of humans and every other animal that is a counterexample to non-aggression, right?
Humans have changed the way they operate in such a way that they can choose their morality. Animals can't choose morality. They can't. They exist the way their instructions exist. They might have small levels of give in what they do, but they can't choose morality like humans can. I don't think you can go, now I don't know, but I don't think you go, see a set of tigers and one of them has one set of tiger religion and the other one has another set of tiger religion. Maybe they do and we just don't know it. But what I'm saying is we clearly, humans, do it differently. And what I'm saying is that we have changed the survival mechanism that existed from one of practical, effective, efficient, well-proven survival mechanism, coexistence mechanism, to a choice. And when we choose it, it's not necessarily good or bad. People make their own morality. I make this point in my book. I love that you question everything so clearly. And this is where I'm going to run into all kinds of trouble. So it's great. But I say we choose our own morality and we don't always choose good morality. We choose bad morality. And how do you judge? You judge on whether things get harmed. That's where I come down.
All right. That sounds like a great summary. So last question, where can people find you? Where can they follow your work?
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm at, my website is thehumanidea.com. I also have a YouTube version. I'm going through all the case of the Human Ideasphere. It's called At the Human Ideasphere. I'm just on like the 3rd chapter of the book. It might take me 500 years to get it done, but that's okay. And then, so I'm on YouTube. I'm on, pretty much all social media. You can find my books the Human Idea, you can find pretty much anywhere. My other books are just on Amazon, so you can find them there. And I loved that we had such a lot of people maybe don't question things so much. So I loved that you questioned everything and it was wonderful. And I hope you read the book and we can chat again, because I think you will be exactly what I need to flesh out the case in the real world.
Yeah, this is one of those examples where I have the acculturated element of me being able to listen and not interrupt. But occasionally I just revert to my nature, and I grew up in Israel, and I just start interrupting and challenging everything. So this was one of these examples. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did. And not only that, but I'm one, like I said, I'm one of 12 children. And, sometimes you just have to jump in when you're ready. And so I hope I didn't interrupt you too much. It was a delight.
It's hard to do that. I am loud.
Well, I love it. And I could probably talk at length with you, and we could really hash out some things. But I really appreciate your perspective. It was wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much.